Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're dialing in from. Hi there. It's Sam Jacobs with Revenue Collective, and I'm really excited for today's session and webinar that we're doing in conjunction with MindTickle. And we've got Lisa Sharapata, who's the Vice President of Marketing, Brand, and Demand for MindTickle, and we've got Jeff Santelices, who's the Chief Revenue Officer for MindTickle. And what we're going to be talking about is some research that Revenue Collective and MindTickle did together, where we surveyed our community to figure out what's going on from the perspective of sales readiness, sales enablement, and what we're calling remote readiness from the vantage point of the CRO. Because as we all know, we're in a remote world and will be for the foreseeable future. And training and engaging and onboarding and making sure that all of our teams are equipped and prepared to execute against the game plan that we are all building and articulating over the course, particularly as we head into 2021, is top of mind for everybody. How do we make sure that the team has the equipment, has the information, has the resources they need to execute the company strategy so that we can continue to grow our businesses? And so we've got a lot of really interesting insights that Lisa and the team at MindTickle have distilled. And we've got color commentary from me and from Jeff talking about some of the results and talking about what we're seeing. If you've got questions at any time, please drop them into the chat box. We're always happy to answer them. You can also click Ask a Question at the bottom of the screen, but frankly, sometimes it's easier for me as the person manning the chat to see them if they're just in the chat box. But we want to make this interactive. Thanks to everybody for saying hello, and let's get started. I'll hand it over to Lisa.
All right, thanks, Sam. I'm just gonna dive right in. Like Sam said, we just pulled together a benchmarking survey, and basically we'll be going over most of the results from that. We got a lot of interesting insights. So the big areas that we're going to cover today are the expanding sales tech stack. It's kind of a mouthful. Expanding sales tech stack. What's on revenue leaders' minds, and the biggest challenges to training effectiveness that we're seeing, and as well as the trends, and especially with Jeff being kind of on the front lines himself. You know, he's a CRO and he's talking to a lot of CROs. He sees a lot of trends that, you know, you might not even find coming out of the survey, right? So with that, I'll just hand it over to Jeff for a minute just to talk a little bit about MindTickle and who we are and what we do. We'll just have 2 slides on that and then we'll dive right in.
Yeah, just thank you, Lisa. And for those of you who are not familiar with MindTickle, I'll just give a quick blurb. You know, what we do and what we're focused on is helping to service our customers, particularly our customers' customer-facing resources, to help them be on message, on task the first time and every time. And our core belief, the vision that we've had from the founding of the company through to date, is that every one of those customer-facing interactions is a revenue opportunity and a brand-building opportunity. As you can see here, from the traction that we've gotten, the customers that are leveraging our platform, we've seen tremendous success in that. Lisa, if you can transition to slide 5, the next question that is often asked is, how do we go about doing it? And what we bring to bear is a platform-based approach on a single data model, single user experience that brings together the breadth of capabilities that help those customer-facing employees learn what it is that they need to know and understand, practice what they've just learned, so that they're fully prepared to get in front of those customers. And when they're actually there, what we provide is a whole series of other capabilities to ensure that frontline managers can observe and provide consistent, actionable feedback to those resources. And when those frontline managers are not available, that we have the capability to provide automated feedback that, again, is consistent and that can identify strengths as well as gaps, and then bring that back into the platform to help help close some of those gaps. So that's MindTickle in a quick blurb. And with that, Lisa, we'll get on our way here with the core content from the survey.
Yep, you bet. So we'll dive into the tech stack here in a sec, but I do want to just kind of put my own commentary on what Jeff's saying too, from a marketing standpoint. When I joined MindTickle a couple of months ago, and looking at it from the lens that marketing is more involved and responsible for revenue than ever before. I start to look at this like marketing used to, if you think about this like professional sports, we used to be required to like bring the fans, right? And now marketing is like the partner with sales, and it's the uniforms and the stadiums and all the graphics and the social media and everything that surrounds it. We're supporting, and then we're creating playbooks and all this other stuff too. And we are now starting to become responsible for outcomes. And so I just think it's everybody's responsibility to be thinking about revenue these days, and how this all works together starts to become really important. So it's not just a CRO has a team of other C-suite people and CMOs and the customer customer success as well. All of those things combined are what's creating revenue. And but a lot of pressure is falling on the CRO these days. And now we've been hearing from CROs like they're feeling like CIOs to some extent, because now they're having to evaluate all this different technology and different ways about doing business. And so just grab this marketecture, but from a sales landscape standpoint, just to kind of set some context here of why it's becoming so challenging now for sales and revenue leaders to figure out what their go-to-market motion is, on top of then what's the right tools and tech to bring into the equation here. And the survey results that we got too said that this is confusing to CROs and other revenue leaders as well. And we asked, can you explain the difference between what is sales enablement versus sales training versus sales readiness? And less than 50% didn't know the difference, weren't really thinking about it. And I like this graphic here because I think it just kind of shows, at a small scale, training is just understanding the product, knowing the process, it's the onboarding stuff. But then when you start to think about readiness, it's everything that it takes to be completely ready for every kind of game. So back to that analogy, like you wouldn't just have your, preseason boot camps and then go try to play, every Sunday against your competition in a major, battle to win, and then, hope that the next week you are better. You train every single day, and you're always evaluating what's working and what's not. And you're always working on improving and getting better and preparing for that next match. And that's the idea of readiness. It's this ongoing like evolution of training and all of the different ways of like role playing or micro learning, things that you're going to do in between your big games to get better and to learn from, what happened the last time. So with that, I will go to this next slide and just talk about that tech a little bit more and pass it over to Jeff.
Absolutely. So, this was a very interesting takeaway in terms of the results. One of the things that was asked was, what is your intention, as you continue to look at technologies? Is it to look at a platform, or bring together best of breed point solutions? And surprisingly for me, 3/4 of the respondents said that they were looking for point solutions, and only the remainder, less than 25%, felt that a platform based approach made sense. And Lisa, if you can slide back to 2 slides when you flash that marketecture. This slide to me, I always laugh at. I'm an old school sales executive. Historically, my sales tech stack involved CRM, and I felt really proud of myself when I upgraded from a forecasting tool called Excel into an actual forecasting solution. And when you look at the breadth of what it is that is on this slide now, I mean, it is daunting. It's bewildering. And for a CRO, many of the conversations that I'm beginning to have, are around, wow, every company that I'm talking to about my front office technology stack has this amazing story with great logos, great use cases. Everyone sounds like panacea, but what should I really be doing? In what order, what prioritization? It's a significant question that's out there. And what I'll call out as a sales leader is that gluing together a bunch of different point solutions and then, figuring out the integrations attached to those is a real challenge, whether you're a hyper-growth company that's, figuring things out, or you're a well-established organization that is pivoting or doing other things. Those integrations are oftentimes very fragile and makes it very challenging to actually execute at the rate and pace that the company oftentimes desires. So if we flip back to slide 9, Lisa, what my core belief is, if I look at this slide, is that while many of us might be thinking of point solutions today, if I flash forward a year from now, what I firmly believe is that we're actually going to see this slide and the results of this question, actually transition. And this might be, kind of a point in time where, as Lisa mentioned, the space that we're talking about specifically is emerging. And over time, I actually, frankly, believe very firmly that we're going to see platforms really taking hold. Sam, I welcome commentary from you on this particular takeaway.
Well, my question, Jeff, is actually sort of related to 2 slides ago, which is, what is the difference between sales enablement and sales readiness? Because it's clear that, I've been hearing readiness much more frequently over the last 2 months, 3 months. It's been actually fairly recent. What is the difference between enablement and readiness as we're thinking about it? Are they the same thing, and readiness is an evolution of the category, or is it different in some way?
Yeah, Lisa, I'll let you take the first crack at responding to that, and I'm happy to add additional commentary.
Yeah. Well, and I will say, Sam, to your point, it's kind of an emerging category, right? And it's something that I think that over the next year or 2 will stand alone. And that's why I like this orange circle, is it starts to show, again, the kind of this difference between what training being kind of a very basic onboarding, maybe some new product announcements that are coming out, like every now and then you're teaching your salespeople a new thing here and there, right? Whereas this idea of readiness is a continuous process of creating and executing these strategies, so that your reps are always ready for that moment of truth and continually learning. So, we can do things now like overlay all of the different customer facing interactions that have happened and look at which reps are winning and are performing the best, and see which things they're doing, and then identify gaps in other people and help coach, assign trainings to them, give their managers knowledge to help communicate with them and help them work to become better in some of the places where they're not as good. And again, kind of back to the sports analogy, it's not like you have boot camp in the summer and then you go play your games and you don't train in between. But I think that's happened a lot in the business world, where that's more the mindset, is just we're always on the front line, we're always out there playing the game, and we're not necessarily taking the time to take a step back, do the work, train in between games, get better at some of the things we're not as good at. And so that's this idea of readiness.
Makes a lot of sense. As it relates to the next slide, Jeff, and just, point solutions versus platforms, I think, as with everything on the internet, it is this world of proliferation and then consolidation. And I think that as new tools, and I think to the point of sales readiness, which is, for me, what it is, to your point, Lisa, it's about making sure that the information that people need is at their fingertips and in front of them in whatever context they are, whether it's in their CRM, on the phone with a prospect. And I think it is fascinating to see all of these different solutions emerge for very specific use cases. And I think if 76% of people are saying they're going to buy point solutions, I do imagine that what that portends is probably M&A and consolidation over the next 3 to 5 years, because it doesn't typically stand that there remains 15 different players in a specific category for the long term. So it should be a pretty exciting space to watch.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't see anybody, but especially not salespeople, logging into one solution and logging out of another one for all the different things they need. So it's hard enough to get them to use Salesforce, right? So, so moving on, and we talked about some of this, so we can maybe go through some of it a little more quickly. But this idea, and I've been talking with Craig Rosenberg over at Topo quite a bit lately, actually, but he just posted a blog recently about what he's seeing for 2021. And he's seeing revenue leaders really focus on this idea of not only like a new kind of sales culture, because everyone's remote, and figuring out how to build relationships and sell virtually, but also more transparency, feedback, and coaching. So it could be things from like having your calls recorded and that transparency where everyone can see it instead of just a couple people in the room, to then being able to leverage that for coaching abilities. So then we did ask, what are CRO's most pressing initiatives? And it was interesting that 67% picked the same 3, which were getting salespeople new to the org ramped and productive, effectively distributing marketing content, and then preparing experienced reps to sell new products. So with that, I'll pass it over to Jeff. I'm sure he's got a lot to say here.
Yeah, seeing the responses here, this wasn't surprising to me, as a sales leader who has gone through a decade's worth of planning and quarterly execution. One of the things that I think many of us recognize as we're going through planning processes is that the 2 biggest levers that we as sales leaders have to play with to get the desired number are around productivity and ramp time. And to see that those continue to be the keys. Again, I think most of us on this call will recognize that. The delta, I think, is that in the planning process, when we're all working with finance and the operational spreadsheets, it's one thing to plan and commit. It's another thing to actually know and understand how to operationalize getting from a 64% productivity level to the planned 72% that is idealized on the Excel spreadsheet. And that's where the enablement front, the readiness front, can really provide us as sales leaders with the underlying tool set to actually execute on getting to productivity and ramp time. So interesting, and I think it's an exciting time because for one of the very first times I think in my career, I actually have something that maps very closely to those key initiatives in terms of execution.
I'd say also, just to chime in, that all of this is even more acute given that we're all remote. What the story of this research, I think, fundamentally is about reimagining how we manage and interact and engage our teams when we're all working remotely and not together. Because readiness, enablement training, ambulances from New York City, hopefully you can hear that in the background. That just lets you know where I'm based. There's always an ambulance for some reason. We don't know why. We can see the flashing lights, and yet they have to make loud, annoying noises. Anyway, the point is that I think the need is even more acute given that we're all working remote. And a lot of things that were handled informally or tacitly, information that was shared informally, around the proverbial water cooler, is not sufficient anymore because we're all essentially in information silos because we're working all over the world, all over the globe, all over the country. And so that's what, for me, it's about how do I make sure that as people join the company, I still want to grow. I still want the company to evolve. We can't slow down because of coronavirus or any other reason. And so what are the tools that we need to ensure that we don't lose a step because we're not sitting next to each other, hearing each other on the phone, or asking that question over lunch or over a coffee. How did you answer that objection? So I think all of this is even more acute because we're trying to use technology to fill in the gaps that were there, that have been made visible by the fact that we're all working remotely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I switched to this slide just to say, I mean, these are the same problems. I think the problems, to your point, are just becoming more acute, and you have to figure out new ways to help solve for them. But I'm guessing if you went back 2 years and 10 years ago, this question would have probably been answered almost the exact same way. It's just now a matter of finding a new way to solve for it.
Yeah.
And then, this slide really kind of fires me up because kind of back to marketing is now responsible for revenue too. And, 75% of people are saying that they're, only somewhat effective at training, and the other 17 are not effective at training. So we've got 8% saying they are. I think, how on earth are we going to meet our numbers? If I'm putting a team together to go compete, in a football game next weekend, I don't want to feel 8% that we're effectively been trained for that game. I want to be 100% confident, or at least 90% confident that we're, trained for that and ready to go. And I get that you're all out on the front line and everyone's working really hard, but I think about, kind of as a best practice now, I think teams are going to be forced to start taking a step back and thinking about what are they doing to be ready to, develop their people on an ongoing basis and to really start to help control the outcomes.
Lisa, as I looked at the results from this question, and I thought through it a little bit, what I felt it reflected was kind of, as a practitioner, on the sales front, kind of the realities of our day to day. As a sales leader, we know that getting our people to a point where they are going to be effective in the field is strategically critical. Okay, but in practice, on a day-to-day basis, we're trying to survive through the quarter and get to the tactical deals that are literally right in front of us that we know if we don't execute on them, we may not survive to fight another day. So figuring out how to appropriately balance the tactical deals in front of us to close this quarter with the strategic items that we need to do to get our teams performing consistently quarter over quarter. That's the balance that I think all of us as CROs need to find, and oftentimes we end up finding ourselves coming up short. And I think that leads us to the criticality, the importance of carving out a specific function that even if I'm or each of you are focused on a handful of deals, that you have a readiness and enablement leader that can focus and put programs in place ongoing throughout, that I think can really help change the metrics that we see here on an ongoing basis. Sam, I don't know if you've got additional thoughts on this as well.
My thoughts are that so many of the new B2B technology companies are tackling a challenge, but they rarely bring in science or academia to figure out what is the best way to tackle that challenge. So I'm looking at this thing, somewhat effective, makes sense to me, because I'm wondering, I personally don't, I'll speak for myself. I don't come from a kind of like an organizational learning background. I'm not still sure that I know how to teach somebody something in terms of what's going to resonate, what's going to be effective. And I think that's something I'm always thinking about. We've got HR service providers that don't have experience leading or understanding, personal behavior, things like that. So I'm just saying, Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising to me that people feel somewhat effective. I feel somewhere between somewhat and not at all effective myself as a trainer. And part of it's because I'm not always certain the right way to transfer information from me to somebody else. Is it a PowerPoint presentation? Is it drills? Are we drilling enough to the point of the coaching metaphor? Are we doing the small movements and the small coaching as effectively as just dumping information on somebody? So, it resonates with me. Particularly.
Yeah,
I
can definitely see that. And, to your point too, 12 months ago, you could ride along with someone and, come out of the meeting and just be like, hey man, if you would have said this or done this differently, it might have had a different outcome or whatever. And it's just kind of on the fly, on the spot. Now you have to think ahead and be thinking through, like setting up those drills ahead of time and being more proactive. So, to your point, I think a lot of organizations just they're not prepared for this, and they haven't thought through the strategy of how they would go about it. So, and we see this here, this next stat that 75%, in addition to the other 75% we just saw, this is a different one stat saying they're struggling to manage their team's productivity. So. And then back to kind of where you were going with it too, the survey showed us that 50%, so half of the teams hadn't even, begun to think about documenting what it's going to take to be a successful remote rep, right? And then when you look at why, it's what we've been saying, it's too hard, it takes too much time. There's other initiatives that are more important, like to Jeff's point, like making it another day. So, I think across the board, this is a lot of heavy lifting, and it's hard to take the time to really do it right.
Yeah, what I'll call out is, I think this is reflective of, the operational realities that I mentioned a couple of slides ago, but I think it also represents a significant opportunity, for those of you who, can actually invest in this and get to a point where you're defining what can make, team members, deliver the way that you want and need them to in this environment. So, again, I look at this as an opportunity moving forward.
All right. So with that, we'll just dig into some of the trends that we're seeing. One of the questions we asked is what tactics are people using? So the people that, are doing some of this, what are they doing the most of right now? And you can see that, 87% are using coaching sessions, 67 role play, 50 are using micro learning. And I'm sure Jeff's going to have a lot to add to this, and he sees more of this day to day, but like at MindTickle, I know that some of our own research is showing that things like the micro learning are the most effective things. So, I think some of that's just the education around or reprogramming and learning within organizations of what is going to be the most effective.
Yeah, as I looked at this data, it was a really nice validation point for, what I believe personally and what I've heard from, many of my other colleagues across the industries. I think for all of us, whether we're managing a team of 20 or a team of 10,000, what all of us recognize is we need to get the reps on the ground, executing the way that we've envisioned as CROs. But it's very challenging to get 10,000 cats, potentially operating in the same fashion if we don't get our frontline managers all on the same, on the same page, providing consistent feedback to those reps. And it's the frontline managers that are in front of those reps most often. That's typically the 6 or 8-to-1 ratio. So getting those reps and leveraging coaching capabilities that provide consistency, actionability, reportability, those are the types of things that get organizations up to scale and performing, at the top level. So I love the fact that, those organizations that are investing in this arena, are taking advantage of these types of capabilities and then supplementing that, with role plays, with micro learning, so it's not obtrusive to the day-to-day, So yeah, I love what I'm seeing in this data, and hopefully it's insightful for those of you who may not be taking advantage of that type of capability. It really does move the needle.
Yeah, I'll say that I'm most bullish on this concept of micro learning, to the point of, how do people actually learn new skills, new information. I'm enthusiastic about it. If you think about, we can use sports or we can use music. Musicians practice scales before they learn whole pieces. And I think what we need to do a better job of, and also I think that the modern era is about shortened attention spans. And so how do we create small learning moments throughout the day and then repeat them and indoctrinate them into the team? And I think tools, technology, and just a structure that, can do a quick question about objection handling, a quick, drill around discovery and the right questions to ask. And here, think of 5 questions you can ask during discovery. I think some of those micro lessons are really going to be a big opportunity for training, readiness, enablement, the entire universe of skills that we're talking about when it comes to onboarding and supporting our reps.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the stories that really stuck with me when I was joining MindTickle is this idea of, even like, you're going into a pharmaceutical call, and it's not a vertical you handle a lot. So taking a 5-minute, micro learning session right before, just to refresh yourself on what's important to the people, in that vertical. What kind of questions might you get, just to even get in the right mindset? That kind of stuff, I think, can make, a huge difference, versus maybe stewing over, the account information in Salesforce one more time. So with that, I'm going to jump to this slide here, which, I think we talked a little about how we see that there's going to be an evolution in this space, and that, it's kind of the tip of the iceberg at this point. And most organizations either have 0 or 1 resource today assigned to this idea of sales enablement or sales readiness, if any. And our research here is showing that the answers were 1 is far too little, probably 2 to 4 is just right. And that's going to depend on the size of your organization as well, and having the right ratios and breaking things out. But the trend is, looking at, in 3 years, most of the leaders are looking at expanding this already and already starting to think about it. So that's great.
Yeah, I'll weigh in here as well. What I find, encouraging about this is, if we were to take a snapshot, from 3-4 years ago, there were very few organizations that had, standalone, teams and investments focused on sales enablement and sales readiness. And over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, we've actually seen a significant step function in that investment. So, just frankly seeing that we've got, a majority of organizations now, actually investing, even though it might be, a small handful of resources, that they're actually investing in this. I think that is, proof point of, the potential and the value that this function, ends up driving to revenue leaders. Now, seeing the expectation that, with the initial successes and results, that there's an expectation that there's going to be further growth and investment. What I'll say is that, in order to justify, growing and increasing the level of investment in this particular arena, as revenue leaders, as enablement practitioners, it's going to be critical that you end up identifying the core metrics that the CROs are focused on, and that you're able to correlate your investments in readiness and enablement directly to those. By doing that, I think the potential to show significant near-term ROI is there, and that will justify helping you to double the size of your readiness and enablement teams. And in the interim, figuring out how you do more with less. So with the small teams that you have today, leveraging technology to execute as efficiently as possible. One of our customers, ended up, having a 25-to-1 span between their account executives and their enablement resources. And by leveraging our technology, they were able to more than double that span. So figuring out in the interim, how you leverage platforms and technologies to really drive effectiveness is something that I think all of us need to be thinking about.
Yeah, one of my friends and a CRO that I really respect, a guy named Kiva Kolstein, who's CRO at AlphaSense, talks about 3 key functions in infrastructure investments that you need to make as a CRO, assuming you're planning for the long term. One of them is recruiting, having a dedicated recruiting resource. The second is operations, and the third is training and enablement and readiness. And I think that, so I'm excited that people understand the importance of this. And I guess the other thing I'll say, tying it back to what you mentioned, Lisa, is that I'm also really encouraged. I think I do see an evolving sophistication from I guess from the world, but from the way that we're all deciding to run and grow these organizations, that understands that investments in infrastructure to prepare a team to grow are critically important. And that, these categories are emerging, hopefully, and, to the point of MindTickle having so many great logos and all of the other vendors in the space having great logos, it's because we're effectively making the case to the CEO that, and these were hard cases to make before, right? One of the most common questions we get in Revenue Collective is, how do I make the case to hire an operations person? How do I make the case to the CEO to hire a sales readiness leader? Because they don't directly, they're not an AE, they don't have a quota, they don't directly add to the top line revenue. And from a short-sighted leader's perspective, all they do is increase cost. And so the evolution of how we think about revenue generation and the understanding that it requires investment in infrastructure, in process, in readiness and enablement, I think that's encouraging to me, because it tells me that companies are being better run, hopefully, and that we're not just throwing 30 reps at a wall and hoping that 5 of them get quota and we'll have a 75% turnover rate with our reps over a 12-month period, and not really fundamentally understand how is money made. And this tells me that we're beginning to get that lesson.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sam, seeing more too, the rate at which companies are now being asked to grow, you can't just hope that your 25% of your people are going to crush it and you circle out the rest. And I think people are starting to do a lot more research too on the cost of actually replacing people and the onboarding and the training that requires alone, and the ramp time, that costs the company a lot of money. And especially the workforce that's coming in now, or the last decade, want to be invested in. They want to grow. They want to learn. The day of the lifer is kind of going away, right? And they're going to stay as long as they feel like they're advancing in their career, that they're being invested in, that they're growing and learning. And that's the mindset. So I think with those things put together, it's kind of this perfect storm in a good way, where you can really start to move the needle and help more people reach their full capabilities, and then hopefully have better outcomes because of it. So
absolutely,
yeah. So with that, I guess before I wrap into these key takeaways, any more points, Jeff or Sam, you wanna?
No, I'm glad we want all of our sessions to have some actionable takeaways. I think these are great. So
good.
Nothing more to add.
All right. So yeah, establishing that baseline of what success looks like, kind of back to we're in a whole new world now, and how do you make your reps successful remotely? It's a different way of thinking and doing business than it used to be. And then needing to staff up. We just talked about how many people is it going to take to help, and what's the right technology. Oh, that's my last one. What's the right technology to help you do that, help you scale, and to be able to pivot quickly too. If you've got too many different pieces of tech running and you're being asked to shift gears, trying to move a whole bunch of different things in a different direction is a lot harder than if the simpler that you are. And now then back to this whole sports analogy, but if you want to win, you've got to be prepared. You got to take the time to prepare, and knowing your accounts is a huge part of that. Knowing what your company's products can do and how they're going to help solve a problem is a huge part of that. But then there's always this ongoing refining and, opportunity to learn from the data and insights that your companies now should be able to capture, with the technology that you have to continually improve, on an ongoing basis. So, take advantage of it.
One thing I'll just add, I want to underscore the first point, establish a baseline. We've talked about this in a number of different Revenue Collective sessions, but again, I forget the stat. Maybe it was only half. Half of the respondents of this survey had documented what does success look like from a rep's perspective. If you haven't done that, if you take nothing else away from the last 41 minutes, I would really, documentation is going to be more important than ever if we're all working remotely. Again, there's no tacit knowledge transmission. We're not sitting next to each other. I can't hear the tone of voice that somebody uses and emulate that tone of voice. So we're going to need documentation. And part of what we're going to need documentation is, this is what success looks like for my team. And I think that's just, if you haven't done that, then that's the first takeaway from, which is why it's the first bullet point on here. But that's the first step. We can't train people and get them up to speed in a successful, effective way if all we're saying is, well, success is hitting quota. So if you don't hit quota, you're not successful. And if you do, you do. We have to document and outline the activities that lead to success so that we can build those activities and the training around them into our onboarding and into our ongoing sales readiness efforts.
Yeah, I couldn't have said that better. Jeff, do you have anything else to add here?
No, I think the two of you summarized the takeaways wonderfully, and hopefully the audience here was able to take some good things away that they can bring into their practices moving forward.
Yep, absolutely. So I'll just say too, we do have a lot of resources, kind of quick start kit, things like that, on our website to help that that are just all free. So check it out.
Lisa, Jeff, we've got a couple of questions here. One of them is, do we know any specific information or resources that quantify or provide metrics regarding the specific impact to an organization with poor onboarding, training, turnover, et cetera? So do we have data maybe from Topo or from some other place that articulate, here's the cost of bad, here's the cost of poor execution that you can point people to?
Yeah, I'll throw a couple of data points out. We've got both Gartner as well as Forrester and a handful of other analysts now beginning to cover the space, quantify the impacts that customers are having. So I'll flip my response around a little bit and call out that from a productivity perspective, once customers end up engaging on best practices, leveraging platform, they're seeing productivity impacts that range anywhere from 18 to or 13 to 25%. So fairly significant dial moves. And then from a ramp time perspective, what they've seen is organizations that have leveraged new approaches and new technologies have seen impacts to their ramp time that range from around 18 to around 23 to upwards of 50%. So and they've got some examples that I think would be really insightful for folks, and we can point you to some of the research reports that I'm referencing here.
Awesome. And if folks want to get in touch with you, Jeff, do you want to drop your email address into the chat box if anybody wants to follow up or has a follow-up question? And folks, we referenced a research report, an economic benchmarking survey that we did in conjunction with MindTickle on this webinar. That's available already to all Revenue Collective members at any level. So if you want to access that, the best way to do that is the Guru integration with Slack /Guru, and then you can type in benchmarking survey and you'll see a full list come up. And then this presentation, which is a distillation of that, will circulate to all attendees and registrants as well. Lisa and the team did a great job putting it together. So, just want to make sure all of this information is available to you if you need it, and you're a Revenue Collective member, and we're happy to share it.
All right. Well, thanks, Sam. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate everyone's time. Thanks for joining us. And let us know if we can do anything to help you.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. And if you need anything, again, Jeff's got his email right there. You can email me, sam@revenuecollective.com. Otherwise, as people know from the Sales Hacker podcast, I'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, everyone.